Hello humans! Mindfulness is an objective awareness of what's happening within us and around us in the present moment. My name is Pablo Das. I am trained as a Buddhist teacher and also as a holistic wellness coach. I work with people around the resolution of trauma and on addiction patterns. My website is causesofwellbeing.com, and today I want to talk about mindfulness. So I had an interesting experience this week, which is that I was invited to talk to a small group of psychologists about mindfulness and trauma and self-regulatory strategies and that sort of thing. And I noticed that I made an assumption up front that because of the inroads that mindfulness has made, and particularly secular mindfulness in the psychology world and in the the clinical world in general, that the people in the room would have had a background in meditation and or mindfulness. My impression was that most people have encountered this in some meaningful and personal way. And so I prepared my presentation with the jumping off point that people had already kind of knew what mindfulness was. And then as I'm beginning, it occurs to me to ask. And in this group of psychologists, there was like one person who was sort of halfway, have you ever had, is mindfulness or meditation part of your direct experience? And I had kind of one person in the group. And that was interesting to me because I'm so steeped for so many years now, 31 years, in the exploration of meditation and mindfulness and all of that. And it's like I'm out of touch with the people on the ground in a kind of weird way. So then I had to back up and kind of talk about mindfulness from a kind of one-on-one perspective. And it occurred to me that there's just a lot of people still walking around the world who don't have any access or exposure to mindfulness. So I wanted to put a video out about that. So now I want to say one other thing before I get started, which is that if you only watch the videos, I'd encourage you to listen, getting our senses straight, to the podcast that I do, because this video will be 10 or 11 or 12 minutes or something. The podcast is over 30 minutes. This week's podcast might be 40 minutes of material on this topic. So it's kind of, as I evolve, the podcast is kind of becoming the thing, and these videos are kind of the abbreviated secondary thing. So I'd encourage you to go and check out the podcast as well. Okay, so here's the definition that I've been using, and which I acknowledge in the podcast that you steal these things and you embellish them over the years. I stole my definition from a monastic named Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is well known in Buddhist circles, particularly as a translator of Buddhist teachings from the original Pali languages and that sort of thing. So here is my definition. That mindfulness is an objective awareness of what happens. Let me start again. Mindfulness is an objective awareness of what's happening within us and around us in the present moment. So this is what I want to break down in the video. The concept of objectivity. I believe that, if I remember right, that Bhikkhu Bodhi used a word that was something like detached, and a detached awareness of what's happening. People who teach mindfulness or teach in Buddhist circles tend to avoid that idea of detachment, because what we're really trying to support is a kind of quality of consciousness that is present, that you're actually in relationship, turning towards, investigating, experiencing whatever's happening. So detachment kind of sends a little bit of a different message, but there is a quality of detachment in a way, because what distinguishes mindfulness from what I would call ordinary consciousness is this sort of sense of being able to step back a bit from your experience and be able to sort of objectively assess what's happening. So there's a couple ways that I try to illustrate this for people who haven't had that experience. So one way is to talk about the difference between, a difficult emotion. So let's say sadness. In ordinary consciousness, you are sad. You literally, in a way, are sadness. You are owned by your emotion. You are in it. You are fully kind of identified with it. You are acting from sadness. You're following the impulses of sadness. There is a kind of unconscious quality to it. There's a sense of being captured by something. Mindfulness does have a sort of detached or objective awareness. It allows you to step back a little bit from your experience so that you can not be so captured, not so driven, not unconscious in your reactions and responses to whatever you're experiencing. So the difference, one of the ways I would illustrate the difference is to say, in ordinary consciousness, you are sad. In mindfulness, you are aware that sadness is present in you. And there's a very big difference. So, and in the podcast, I go into some of the benefits. And one of the big benefits of objective awareness, this sort of slightly different quality of awareness, is that there's a pause built into it. So you're sort of like you're aware of what is happening. And actually, one of the easiest ways to support a kind of mindful state, to move from ordinary consciousness, slow down, to mindfulness, is just simply to ask yourself, well, what's happening? So even as you're sitting here listening to this video, what's happening? What are you aware of? And you might even say, I'm aware, like right now, you might have noticed I have an itch in this nostril. So there's that. I'm wearing socks. So I'm aware of the contact of my socks on the bare wood floor. I'm in pretty good spirits today, so I'm aware of a quality of my mood is good, So just to simply ask that question, like what's happening, maybe even how do you know what's happening, gives you, allows for you to sort of pause, to investigate your experience, to, even deconstruct your experience. So if we come back to sadness, well, what is sadness? How do we know that we're sad? How does sadness manifest in our experience? Well, it has very specific physical locations. Sadness lives here. It lives here when we talk about being choked up, maybe a heaviness in the chest, a heaviness in the belly. The emotional centers, the sensations of emotion, show up in our physical bodies. So, and all of this, the big thing is that in that pause, in that investigation, in that sort of objectivity, we get to choose how to respond to something rather than react. In ordinary consciousness, we tend to be reactive. We just follow the impulses of whatever we're experiencing. If we're hungry, we just eat. If we're craving something, we just have it. If we're horny, we just do it, In objective awareness and kind of mindfulness, we get to step back and go, interesting, here are these sort of emotional qualities, these emotional experiences happening. I can investigate them, I can consider and reflect about the conditions that brought them into being, and I can sort of, as they say in recovery circles, think through the drink. I can consider the implications, the impacts of my responses. And that all of the responsiveness, as distinguished from reactivity in ordinary consciousness, can be filtered through a ethical framework that you can actually consider. How can my response support well-being for myself and the other beings and maybe the natural environment or whatever, the internal and the external, right? Okay, so let me just talk about, I just have time probably to talk about the rest of the video or the rest of the definition really quickly. So back to the definition. Mindfulness is an objective awareness of what's happening within us and around us in the present moment. So the within us part is where we get into the ways that mindfulness is traditionally taught. And so in traditional mindfulness teaching, as it's taught in its Buddhist origins, we are asked to establish awareness in basically 3 different dimensions of our experience. The first is the physical body. So we pay attention to sensations, we pay attention to emotions, which largely are manifesting as sensations, as I described earlier. We are asking, kind of inviting ourselves to be embodied, to know ourselves at a physical level, to know what's happening within us biologically, physiologically, emotionally, sensation, we can gain insight into the quality of our experience. We can get to know ourselves really deeply in that regard. So then externally means to be aware of how we're making contact in the world through our senses. So as we see things and we smell things and we hear things and we taste things and we receive things as sensations, the heat and cold, the physical contact, we have a relationship then with the external world. And of course the external world is impacting the internal world and vice versa, and there's this sort of interplay. And that's what we call the human experience. So to wake up to our experience at that level in the physical body is the first, as we would say, foundation, the first place to establish awareness. The other obvious place to establish awareness is in the mind. Traditionally, we are interested in paying attention to mind states. This is the states of aversion and craving, so not wanting things and wanting things. Now, of course, we teach also mindfulness, that is objective awareness of words and images in the mind, which we call thoughts, moods, mind states, all of that sort of stuff. So that's the other place that we pay attention, and particularly to mind states of aversion and attraction, because since mindfulness in its traditional origins is an ethical system, then we're interested in how our mind states precipitate intentions, which lead to speech and actions, which bring results in the world, right? And we start to notice that there's this chain of events that leads all the way back to this sense of liking and disliking things in our minds. And that our whole world, our whole lives as human beings are in many ways unconsciously driven by liking and disliking things. Everything from the unhealthy food that we eat to our politics today. So this is an incredibly important thing to pay attention to. And then in between the body and mind, in terms of how we're establishing awareness, is something called feeling tone. And this takes the sense of liking and disliking things in the mind and goes back even one more step. And that one other step is the sense that as we move through the world, we experience things as pleasant and unpleasant. And sometimes, of course, things that don't grab our attention are sort of neutral to us. But that is an incredibly important thing, because the whole kind of endeavor of traditional Buddhist teachings, as I said, is an ethical endeavor. It's one where we try to, we're concerned basically with one real thing, which is not to cause suffering. That is to self-generate suffering in ourselves, and nor is it to cause external harm to other beings and such. So those are the traditional foundations of mindfulness. The piece about the feeling tone is really important because it is the beginning of the chain of events. The sense of liking and disliking things gives way or gives rise to, the sense of pleasant and unpleasant gives rise to the sense of liking and disliking things, which is the foundation of mindfulness. We're paying attention to what our mind does with things as they arise. And that's a whole chain of events that leads to intention and action and brings results, and that's what's called karma, and the idea that actions bring results. So that is basic mindfulness 101, the sense of an objective quality of awareness, and then the anchoring of attention, the establishing of awareness in the body, in the mind, and in the sense of liking and disliking things, all in the service of living an ethical life, to speak and act in the world in a way that minimizes the self-generation of suffering and the causing of harm to other beings. That's what I got for you. Go see the podcast, go listen to the podcast. If you're interested in one-on-one support, my website is causesofwellbeing.com. My name is Pablo Das. I hope this has been useful to you. Thank you so much for listening. Cheers.